The tribute ground sat at the edge of the world, where the last road out of Eldervale gave up and let the snow take it. Sabine stood at the end of the line. 17 women, 12 kingdoms, all of them chosen because someone somewhere had decided they could be spared, that their absence would leave no hole in the world worth mending. The wind came down off the mountains like it had somewhere better to be, and every woman in that line wept, tears freezing on their lashes before they could fall, every woman except the one at the end, because Sabine could not weep, not through the cloth. They had wrapped it around her mouth that morning, before the sun was even a rumor on the horizon, from the bridge of her nose to the point of her chin bound so tight the fabric bit into her cheeks and pulled at the corners of her lips. They called it a silencing veil, a soft name, a gentle name, the kind a person invents when they cannot bear to look straight at the thing they've done. Sabine had another name for it, a muzzle. The other tributes did not understand. She could see it in the way their eyes kept sliding toward her, then away, quick, guilty. Why gag that one? What could a girl have done that they'd fear her voice more than the monster? Some of them, she knew, had screamed themselves hoarse the night before. Screaming was allowed. Screaming was expected. Screaming was what you did on the tribute ground. But Sabine had not been bound for screaming. She had been bound for speaking, and they did not know what lived on her tongue. The guard beside her shifted his weight, stamping feeling back into his feet. A young man, barely older than she was, with a raw red nose and eyes that would not meet hers. When one of the other women leaned toward him and whispered a question, he answered without turning his head. "Name speaker," he said. "Tongue bound by order of Lord Roderick himself. She speaks, you die." The women shrank back like she was a coal that had rolled out of the fire. Sabine kept her eyes forward. Not on them, not on the guards. On the tree line where the pines stood black against the white, and the darkness pooled thick beneath them, as if the night had gotten tangled in the branches and could not climb back out. That was where he would come from. She knew it the way she knew things she was never meant to know. Her father stood 40 paces off with the delegation from Eldervale, wrapped in furs the color of old blood. Lord Roderick. A tall man, still handsome in the way that cold stone is handsome. He was not looking at his daughter. He was looking at the tree line too, and there was something in his face that was almost like patience. Almost like a man waiting for a debt to finally mercifully be paid. And he was not alone. Beside him stood a stranger. A tall man in gray robes the color of ash and old smoke, a face smooth and patient as a stone worn down by water. Sabine had never seen him before, but her father leaned toward him when he spoke the way a man leans toward someone he owes. And the stranger watched the tribute ground the way a merchant watches a shipment come in, not cruel, not warm, only counting. When his pale, flat eyes passed across Sabine, they lingered a half-beat too long. Then they moved on, as if she'd been noted, filed away. She did not know his name yet. She would learn it in time. Corvain. But that night on the tribute ground, he was only a man in gray, who watched her father like a leash watches a hand. On Roderick's other side stood Isolde, her half-sister, 6 years younger, softer, wrapped in white, her cheeks bright with cold and something that was not the cold at all. Isolde was looking at Sabine. Had been looking at her, Sabine realized, for a long time. And when their eyes met across the frozen ground, Isolde did not look away. Her lips moved. Sabine could not hear it, but she did not need to. "I'm sorry," which was almost worse than if she'd said nothing. Because sorry is what you say when it's already done. The tribute master climbed onto the platform. An old man in ceremonial gray, his voice thinned by the years and the wind. He raised his hands and the wind obligingly dropped. "We gather," he called out, "to honor the ancient pact between the southern kingdoms and the Lord of Northreach. 17 souls offered in tribute that our lands may know another year of peace. Peace." Sabine wanted to laugh. She could not, of course. The cloth saw to that. But the laugh was there anyway, bitter and cold in her chest. Peace bought with the daughters nobody wanted. Peace paid for by the ones whose absence would not be mourned. Her mother had taught her once a long time ago, before the world went wrong, that every ugly thing men do, they do in a pretty word's clothing. Wrap it in silk, call it duty, call it peace. Call it a silencing veil instead of a muzzle, and people will look the other way. Then the wind changed, not gradually, all at once. Every torch along the platform bent sideways in the same breath, the flames stretching thin and blue, bowing low toward the tree line like courtiers before a king. The temperature dropped. Sabine felt the ice form on her lashes, felt her breath go solid inside the cloth. Somewhere down the line, a woman made a sound that had no name, not a scream, not a sob, something older than both. And a pressure began to build, against her mind, behind her eyes, ancient and vast and burning cold, a weight like the whole northern sky leaning down to see what small things had been left out for it in the snow. Two of the tributes dropped to their knees. One simply fainted, folding into the drifts. Three began to scream. Because he was coming. Then he was there. He did not walk out of the blizzard, so much as the blizzard peeled back to reveal him, as if it had only ever been a curtain, and he the thing behind it. And Sabine, who had spent her whole life being told what the monster of the north looked like, twisted, grotesque, a horror with too many teeth, Sabine felt every one of those stories curdle and die in her chest, because the monster was beautiful, tall past reason, hair the color of fresh frost falling loose past his shoulders, a face carved by something that did not love the thing. It made cheekbones sharp enough to open skin, a jaw like the edge of a broken sword. He wore no furs. In that killing cold he wore no furs at all, and across his bare forearms, the rime spread and melted and spread again, drawing patterns like a language nobody living could read. And his eyes, pale, nearly white, the blue of ice so old the color had almost gone out of it. Eyes that swept along the line of women and found in each of them precisely nothing. This was not a king. This was winter given a body and a hunger. The tribute master's voice cracked straight down the middle. Lord Droust, we present quiet. One word. The old man's jaw snapped shut so hard, Sabine heard his teeth click from 30 paces off. The monster moved along the platform. Slow. Unhurried. The way the tide is unhurried, or the frost that finds its way through stone in the dead of winter. His gaze touched each woman and dismissed her. This one. Not this one. None of these. Until it reached the end of the line, until it reached her, and stopped. Sabine felt it land on her like a hand pressed flat against her chest. Felt him take in the cloth over her mouth, the two guards flanking her where the others had none, the way she'd been set apart from the rest, like something that came with a warning label. He crossed to her. Every soul on that ground stopped breathing at once. Up close he was worse. Or better. She could not decide, and the not deciding frightened her more than the cold. She could see the rime clinging to his lashes, the faint, terrible blue in his lips. He smelled of pine and snow, and underneath something darker, something that made her think of the deepest part of winter, the part that comes just before the dawn, that never seems to arrive. Why, he said, and his voice was low and rough, and had not been used gently in a very long time. Is this one bound? Her father stepped forward, quick, eager. She is dangerous, my lord. A name speaker. I offer her with the warning that she should not under any circumstance be permitted to— I was not asking you. Lord Roderick retreated. And Sabine watched her father, the man who had ruled her whole world, who had bound her tongue and sold her to the snow, take a step backward from those pale eyes, like a boy caught somewhere he should not be. Behind him, the man in gray did not move at all. He only watched, counting. Then the monster looked at her again, and something began to rise in her chest. The name. It was there. It was always there, with everyone humming just beneath their skin like a second pulse. But his was not a hum. His was a roar. A blizzard trapped behind her teeth, a name so old and so buried, it had been waiting 300 years for a mouth that could hold it, and it wanted out. It pressed against the cloth. It pressed against the binding her father's coin had bought. It did not care what it would cost her. The monster tilted his head. You know something. Not a question. What do you know, little wolf? She should not. She knew she should not. The binding would trigger. The pain would be a thing beyond describing. And even if it did not kill her, even if she lived, what mercy waited on the other side of speaking? None. There had never been any mercy for her, not once, not in her whole life, except his eyes were on her now, truly on her, seeing her. Not the warning, not the crime, not her mother's ghost in her face. Just her. And no one had looked at her like that, not ever, not once in 19 years. And the name would not wait. So she spoke. The word tore through the cloth like flame through paper. Not Droust. That was the name the histories had written down. The name they carved on the warnings, the name mothers used to frighten children into their beds. She spoke the name beneath it, the true one. The one that had been buried so deep that the burying itself had become part of the curse. Aldrich. The world stopped. The monster of the north went utterly perfectly still. Not the stillness of a man surprised, the stillness of a mountain. The stillness of something that has just heard a sound it stopped believing in centuries ago. Behind her someone screamed. The silencing veil caught fire against her skin, not real fire, worse than fire. The binding's punishment blooming across her jaw and cheeks in a white sheet of agony that drove the breath from her lungs and the strength from her knees. She was falling. But she kept her eyes on his face. Because she had to see it. She had to know she'd been right. And she watched it happen, watched something fracture behind that frozen expression, a hairline crack running through 300 years of ice. Shock. Then recognition. Then last and strangest of all, fear. Where, he breathed. So quiet. Just for her. Where did you learn that name? The darkness came up to meet her. And before she struck the frozen ground, cold hands caught her face. She heard him speak, not to her, to all of them. I'll take this one. The tribute ground erupted, her father's voice high and cracking, something about danger, about crimes, about a curse. The tribute master stammering about protocol, about the order of selection, about how it simply was not done. I said, the monster told them, and he did not raise his voice, and somehow that was so much worse. I'll take this one. Does anyone here wish to challenge me? Silence. Of course. He looked down at her, then at the burns rising along the ruin of her mouth, at the defiance she could not stop from burning in her eyes, even as the dark ate the edges of the world. You spoke my true name, he murmured. Do you understand what that means? She could not answer. She could barely see him now, but she shook her head. No, she did not understand. She had never understood, not one day of her life. Something moved across his face, not a smile, nothing so warm as that, but something. Neither do I, he said, but we are going to find out. And he lifted her against his chest, cold, so cold, a cold that should have finished what the binding started, and turned and carried her back into the blizzard. The last thing Sabine saw before the white swallowed everything was her father's face. And he was not afraid. How was smiling. And the man in gray beside him was already turning away, already walking as if the only part of the evening that mattered to him was over and had gone precisely as arranged, which she would remember later when it mattered most. But by then, the snow had her, and the dark had her, and she knew nothing more. She woke to warmth, and for a long drifting moment she was certain she had died, because everyone knew the beast's territory was a wasteland of frost where tribute girls perished within a single moon. Everyone knew it was a place of ice and ending. So the warmth beneath her, the deep animal softness of furs, the honest crackle of a real fire somewhere close could only mean one thing. She had crossed over. And death, it turned out, was warmer than her whole life had been. Then she breathed, and the breath did not hurt, and she lifted a hand to her mouth and found her mouth was bare. No cloth, no cloth. Her fingers moved across her lips, her jaw, her cheeks, and where the burns had been, there was only new skin, tender as a healing thing, but whole. The muzzle was gone. Sabine lay very still and did not understand why her eyes had filled. She sat up slowly. The chamber was carved from dark stone, larger than any room she had ever slept in, and everywhere on the walls, across the vaulted ceiling, along the very floor. The rhymes spread in those same living patterns, blooming and fading, like the breath of some enormous sleeping thing. You're awake. Her heart slammed against her ribs. He stood by the window, a tall shape against the gray morning light, the frost climbing the glass behind him in ferns and feathers. Droust. Aldrich. She did not know which name to hold in her mind, and the not knowing made her dizzy. Where am I? Her voice came out cracked, unused. My home. He did not turn. You've been unconscious 2 days. The binding magic nearly finished what your father started. Her hand went to her throat. The veil. Who? I did. Now he turned. The enchantment was made to punish speech, he said. I unmade it. Why? He crossed the room, settled into a chair set across from the bed, and this close in this light, she could see the faint blue tracing of veins beneath skin so pale it was nearly translucent. She could see that he was tired in a way that had nothing to do with sleep. Because I want answers, he said. My true name. No living soul has spoken it in 300 years. The one who gave it to me is dead. The texts that held it were burned to ash. His jaw tightened. How did you know it? Her hands twisted in the furs. I don't know how. You will have to do better than, I don't know how. She met his eyes and she was surprised at her own steadiness. I have never known how. The names simply come to me. True names. Hidden ones. The names underneath the names. I look at a person and I know what they are called beneath every mask they've ever worn. She swallowed. I have been able to do it since I was a child. It is not a thing I chose. He studied her for a long moment. A name speaker, he said slow. I believed your kind were gone from the world. Nearly. The word came out smaller than she meant it to. When it first showed in me the gift my father had my tongue bound. Any true name I spoke would trigger the punishment you saw. He told the kingdom I was cursed. He told them I'd used my power to kill a man. The pale eyes did not blink. Did you? The question hung in the warm air. And here it was. The thing she had never told anyone. The thing she had carried alone for so long that setting it down felt less like confession and more like tearing something out of her own chest. I spoke a man's name, she said. Once. He was hurting a child. He had the boy by the throat up against a wall, and the child's face was going the wrong color, and no one was doing anything, and the man's true name was just there, right there, behind his teeth like a stone I could throw. Her voice shook. She let it. So I threw it. I spoke his name, and I wanted him to stop. I wanted it more than I have ever wanted anything. And he died. She looked at her hands. I don't know how. I have never known how. But my father finally had his excuse, his proof, his curse made flesh. She laughed and there was no laughter in it. He'd been waiting for it. I understand that now. He'd been waiting for a reason the whole world would believe. The fire spoke into the silence. Once, twice. Your father sent you here to die, the monster said. Not cruelly, just true. Yes. Because you're a name speaker. Because I am a reminder. The words came before she could stop them, and once they were out, she could not call them back, and part of her did not want to. My mother had the gift too. When my father discovered it, he had her executed. But I inherited her power. And I inherited her face. And every single time he looked at me, he saw the woman he'd killed staring back out of his own daughter's eyes. She had never said it aloud, not once, not in 19 years. And the monster of the north who had ruled 3 centuries of frost, who had watched 100 tribute girls die and not lifted a finger, looked at her across the fire with something in his ancient face that she could not name, and she was a name speaker, and she could name almost anything. But not that. Not yet. I am going to make you an offer, he said at last. You may refuse it. If you do, I will return you to the tribute ground, and what happens after is no longer my concern. He paused. But I do not think you want to go back. What offer? Stay here, as my consort in name. He held up a hand before she could speak. Not as a wife. I have no use for a wife. In exchange for letting me study your power, for helping me understand what you are and how you knew what you knew, you will have my protection, comfort, warmth, and the freedom to speak as you wish, Whenever you wish, about whatever you wish. His eyes held hers. No more bindings, no more veils. No one will ever silence you again. Not while you are under my roof, not while I draw breath. Sabine did not answer right away. Because the offer was too large. Because it was the shape of every quiet prayer she had never dared to say out loud, and things that shape did not come free. "What's the price?" she said. Something that was almost approval moved through his expression. "You will never speak my true name again," he said. "Not to me, not to anyone. What you know of it stays buried where it has always been, between us, and nowhere else." Why? Because names have power. He looked away toward the window, toward the white. "And mine in the wrong mouth could destroy me. Or worse, it could destroy a great deal more than me." She turned it over, all of it. "And if I agree," she said, "you said consort, does that mean you will have your own chambers?" The answer came fast, like he'd been waiting to give it. "I will not touch you without your leave. I do not want a body warmed against mine out of fear or debt. I want a mystery, nothing more." Cold, she thought. Cold, but not cruel. And after a lifetime of her father's hatred dressed up in duty's clothing, after a whole life of pretty words wrapped around ugly things cold, that told her the truth, to her face felt almost like being cared for. Almost. "One condition," she said. He raised a brow, as if no one had made him a condition in a very, very long time. "This true name," she said carefully. "Aldrich. Is that the name you want me to call you when we're alone? When no one else can hear?" Raw emotion crossed his face. Pain, and beneath the pain, something that had not seen the light in centuries, a longing so old it had almost forgotten it was longing at all. Then it was gone. Ice closed over it like water over a dropped stone. "The other one," he said. "Always the other one." "Droust, then." She held out her hand. "I accept your terms." He looked at her hand as if he had forgotten what hands were for. Then his closed around hers. And she gasped, because his skin was ice. Genuine aching ice, the cold of it shooting straight up her arm and into her chest. But beneath the ice buried so deep she almost missed it, faint as the last ember in a fire everyone had given up as dead, there was warmth. A single flicker of warmth. Alive. Refusing against all reason to go out. He felt her feel it. She saw it in his eyes, the sudden widening, the alarm. He pulled his hand back too fast, too hard, and stood and turned toward the door before she could say a word. "Rest," he said, his back to her. "Tomorrow we begin." And he left without looking back. Sabine sat alone in the warm dark, her hand still tingling where it had touched the impossible. She had chosen the beast. Now she had to survive him. And worse, far worse, though she did not know it yet, she had to survive what would happen to them both once she understood exactly what that flicker of warmth beneath the ice truly meant. They bound her to the beast 3 days later. Not the true claiming. Droust had made that plain quiet and firm the night before. But the ancient laws of Northreach demanded something. A ceremony witnesses a mingling of names before the eyes of the old powers. And so the great hall of the fortress filled with the strangest gathering the North had seen in generations. Envoys had ridden through 3 days of blizzard to see it with their own eyes. The impossible thing, the monster of the North who had devoured every woman ever offered to him, taking one to keep. Not to keep, Sabine reminded herself, standing on the raised dais in furs the color of moonlight. An arrangement, a bargain, nothing more. But the crowd did not know that. She could hear them. The whispers ran through the hall like water under ice. She must have bewitched him. He'll grow bored and devour her by the next moon. Look at her face. She has no idea what she's married. Droust stood beside her in formal black, and he was magnificent, and he was terrified. She could see it now in the small ways she was learning to read him. The clenched hands, the rime creeping across his sleeves faster than usual, blooming and dying, blooming and dying. Something about this frightened him. She just did not yet know what. The officiant began the old words, but Sabine's attention snagged on movement at the back of the hall. Her father had come. Lord Roderick swept through the crowd with Isolde at his side, his face a careful mask of diplomatic courtesy. But Sabine knew that face. She had grown up beneath that face. It was the face he wore when he was waiting, calculating, when the pieces were already moving, and only he knew where they would fall. And a step behind him, half in shadow, came the man in gray from the tribute ground. He did not announce himself. He did not need to. He simply stood at the edge of the hall with his hands folded and watched the beast of the north. The way a man watches a fire he is not sure is fully out. The terms of this bond must be spoken, the officiant intoned. Droust stepped forward. This woman will be my consort in name, he said, his voice carrying to every corner of the frozen hall. She will have my protection and the full authority of my house. In exchange, she gives me her presence when I require it, and her loyalty until such time as our arrangement concludes. A ripple ran through the crowd. That was no bonding vow anyone had ever heard. My lord, her father's voice, cutting clean through the whispers. The hall went silent. Droust turned, slowly. Before this bond is sealed, Roderick said, stepping forward with his hands spread wide. All reason, all reasonable concern. I must register my formal protest. Your protest is noted. Droust's voice could have frozen the fire in the hearth. And denied. You do not understand what you are binding yourself to. Roderick pressed on, and there was an edge under the smoothness now, a thread of something almost like panic. This woman is a tongue-bound criminal. She used her cursed gift to kill. If you permit her to speak freely, my lord, if you remove her bindings, she could what? Droust descended the dais, one slow step at a time. Kill me. He stopped before her father, and though Roderick was not a small man, the monster made him look like a child. She already knows my true name, Lord Roderick. She spoke it on the tribute ground before your entire delegation. If she wished me dead, I would already be a corpse in the snow. The color went out of her father's face. So I find myself wondering. Droust's pale eyes narrowed. Why is it that you are so very determined to silence her, a daughter with a gift? Any other father in these kingdoms would boast of it, would sell her services for gold. But you. He leaned close and his voice dropped just for the two of them, though the whole silent hall strained to hear. You bound her mouth shut and sent her north to die. What is it exactly that you are so afraid she might say? Roderick stumbled back a full step, and Sabine, watching from the dais, her heart a fist in her throat, saw something she had never once seen on her father's face in all her 19 years. She saw him afraid. Of her. And at the edge of the hall, the man in gray tilted his head a fraction and made a small note of something, and did not look afraid at all. This woman is my consort, Droust announced, turning his back on Roderick as if he were furniture. Any insult offered to her is an insult offered to me. Her past is erased. Her crimes are pardoned. From this day in the eyes of Northreach and every soul beneath its snow, she begins again. He extended his hand toward her. Sabine took it. Cold always the cold, and beneath it that stubborn buried ember. She descended to stand at his side. You didn't have to do that, she murmured low, for him alone. I know. Then why? Something shifted in his gaze, and for just a moment the ice thinned enough that she could see straight through to whatever lived beneath. Because I know, he said, what it is to have your own family wish you dead. The ceremony wound to its close. The envoys offered their hollow congratulations, their frozen smiles, their eyes already composing the stories they'd tell back home. And then Isolde was at her elbow. We need to speak, her half-sister whispered. Now. Alone. They slipped behind a pillar of black ice into an alcove where the torchlight did not reach. Isolde's hands were shaking. You have to leave, she said. Sabine, please. Father isn't finished. If the beast didn't reject you at the ceremony, and he didn't, then there's another plan. There's always another plan. What plan? I don't know the shape of it. Isolde glanced back over her shoulder, quick, frightened. But I heard him. Last night. Speaking with that man in gray, the one who follows him now, the one who came south with him. Father calls him Corvain. He calls his people the Silent Order. Her voice dropped to almost nothing. And Father said, he said, when the beast learns what she truly is, We'll finish this ourselves." Cold moved through Sabine that had nothing to do with the North. "He means my gift," she said. The name speaking. Droust already knows. No. Isolde grabbed her arm, held on too tight. "Not that. Not the speaking. The other thing. The thing father never told you. The thing about our mother." The fire in Sabine's blood went out. "What about my mother?" Isolde's face twisted, caught between pity and something that looked horribly like fear. "You don't only speak true names, Sabine. That's not all of it. That's not all you inherited from her." Another glance over her shoulder. "There's no time. Just know that when he learns what you really are, when he understands, he won't only send you away." "Isolde, what are you saying?" Her sister leaned close, and her whisper was barely a breath, barely a sound at all. "He'll destroy you himself, before you can undo what he's spent everything to keep buried." And then she was gone, slipping back into the crowd, into the light, leaving Sabine alone behind the pillar of ice with her heart pounding and the whole warm hall suddenly very, very cold. What you really are. The other thing. There was something else. Something in her. Something from her mother. Something her father had killed to hide and would kill again to keep hidden. And across the crowded hall, through the shifting bodies, and the frozen breath, and the golden torchlight, the pale eyes of the monster of the north found her. And held her. He had his secrets. She had hers. And her father had secrets stacked on the bones of the dead. The only question left, Sabine thought standing very still, while the snow fell soft and endless past the windows, was which truth would surface first, and which one of them it would drown. The first week in the fortress, Sabine learned the shape of her new life, the way you learn a house in the dark, by touching everything, by finding the edges. She had her own chambers as promised, a room of black stone and white furs with a window that looked out over the frozen valley and a fire that never seemed to need tending. She had freedom to walk the halls, freedom to speak, and oh, how strange that was to open her mouth and have sound come out, and have no one flinch, no one reach for a binding, no one look at her like a loaded weapon someone had carelessly left on a table. She spoke to the walls those first days, just to hear it, just because she could. And every evening at the same gray hour, Droust came to find her and they went together to the library, because that was the bargain, her power in exchange for her life. And so each night they sat among the frozen shelves, and he brought her the old textbooks, so cold their pages cracked when they turned ink gone blue with age, and he asked her his questions, and she gave him what answers she had, which was not many. "Speak a name," he said that first night in the library. "Any name, mine accepted." So she looked at the book in his hands, at the long-dead author whose bones had been dust for centuries, and the name rose in her the way it always did. Soft. A whisper behind her teeth. "Alden Farrow," she said, "though the cover says otherwise." Droust went still. Then he turned to the title page and read the name printed there. A different name, a false one. "He wrote under an invented name," he said slowly. "His true one is recorded nowhere. It was struck from every history." "But it was still his." Sabine shrugged. "Names don't stop being true just because someone stops saying them." He looked at her for a long moment. "No," he said. "I don't suppose they do." And something passed between them. Small. Almost nothing. Except it was not nothing, because she felt it land in his chest, that idea, the way a stone lands in still water. Names don't stop being true just because someone stops saying them. And she watched him carry it away behind his eyes, turning it over, and she understood, though she could not have said how, that she had just handed him something dangerous. A hope, maybe. And hope for a man like him was the most dangerous thing of all. She did not understand that yet. She would. The nights taught her things the days did not. Because Droust, she learned, was not always the same. Some evenings he arrived in the library sharp and cold and precise, his questions like small clean knives. And some evenings he arrived and could not speak at all. The first time it happened, she thought he was angry. He came through the door and sat in his chair and opened his mouth, and nothing came out. His jaw worked, his pale throat moved, and the rime was climbing his neck in thin white branches, reaching up toward his lips like it meant to seal them shut from the inside. Sabine did not think. She crossed the room and knelt in front of his chair and put her hands against his throat. He flinched. She held on. "Warmth," she said. "You told me heat is agony, but that's not what your body is telling me right now. Let me." And she held her hands there, palms flat against the ice of his skin, and she felt the frost fight her, felt it crackle and resist cold seeping up into her wrists until her own fingers ached. But she did not let go. She thought of every fire she had ever loved. She thought of summer, though she'd been born in a cold country and had known precious little of it. And slowly, the frost on his throat began to melt. He drew a breath, a real one, shuddering. "You should not have done that," he said when he could speak. "You're welcome," she said, and he almost smiled, which she would think about for a long time afterward. The almost. The way his mouth had started toward something warm before the cold caught it and pulled it back. Because a man does not fight that hard against a smile unless smiling has cost him somewhere sometime. And badly. The frost was spreading. She noticed it in the second week. A morning when she came to the library early and found him already there asleep in his chair, and the rime had crept from his forearms, up past his elbows, curling around the inside of his arms in patterns like frozen vines. The week before it had stopped at his wrists. She said nothing, but she started watching. And every 7 days she could mark the change. Wrists, then elbows. Then by the end of the third week she caught a glimpse one evening, as he reached across the table, a thin white tracery climbing the side of his neck, disappearing beneath the collar of his shirt. It was moving. It was moving fast. And it was moving faster she slowly began to understand on the nights they laughed. Because they did laugh by then. She had not expected it. She had come to this place braced for a monster and found instead a man who had simply been alone so long he'd forgotten how to be anything else. And when she pushed at him, when she teased him about the terrible penmanship in his own journals, when she caught him out in some 300-year-old opinion and refused to let it stand, he came alive, slow, rusty, like a door that hadn't opened in a lifetime. And the frost climbed higher on those nights. She told herself it was coincidence, until it wasn't. "There's something wrong with you," she said one evening. Not gently. She had learned he did not want gentle. "You're getting worse. I've watched it for 3 weeks. The frost is winning." He set down the book he was not reading. "It has always been winning," he said. 300 years, Sabine. The curse has been killing me by inches for 3 centuries. What you're watching now is simply the last stretch of a very long road." "How long?" "I don't know." "How long, Aldrich?" His head came up sharp at the name. She never used it. She'd promised never to use it, but she needed him to hear her, truly hear her, and the true name was the only key she had that could reach that deep. "Weeks," he said quietly. "Perhaps a month. The frost will reach my heart, and then the beast of the north will trouble no one ever again." He looked at the window, the endless white. "It is not the tragedy you think it is. I have been ready to die for a very long time." "Well, I'm not ready for you to." The words were out before she could catch them, and they hung there in the cold air between them, honest and terrible, and she wanted to snatch them back and could not, and she felt her face go hot, and Sabine. His voice was strange. Do not what? Do not care whether I live." He stood abrupt, the chair scraping stone. "You cannot understand what you're doing, what it costs. Caring for me is not, it is not safe, for either of us. Why? I can't. Why, Aldrich? Because caring is what's killing me." The words cracked out of him like ice breaking on a lake. And then he stopped, horrified it seemed at himself, at what had escaped. And the rhyme surged up his throat in a sudden white flood so fast she saw it move, and he turned away from her and gripped the edge of the table until his knuckles went whiter than they already were. Sabine stood very still, because the pieces were falling into place, and she did not like the shape they made. The frost climbed faster on the nights they laughed, on the nights he almost smiled, On the nights something warm tried to live in that dead room, and he let it just for a moment, just a little. It's the curse, she said slowly. Isn't it? The reason you require the dark. The reason you leave before dawn. The reason you told me not to care. Her voice dropped. The warmer you feel, the more you let yourself feel it, the faster the frost takes you. He did not answer, which was answer enough. How does that even... She pressed her hand to her mouth. That's not a curse. That's a trap. That's someone built that. Someone sat down and thought, how do I make certain this man dies as painfully as possible? And they decided the way to do it was to make sure the one thing that could save him is the very thing that kills him faster. Yes, he said, to the window. That is precisely what someone decided. Who? It doesn't matter now. It matters to me. And he turned then and looked at her, and there was so much grief in his ancient face that she felt her own throat close. You are the first person in 300 years, he said, who has made me want to live, and wanting to live is going to kill me faster than the frost ever could have on its own. Do you understand now, Sabine? Do you understand why I told you not to care? She did. She understood completely, and she cared anyway. She started looking for a way out, a crack in the trap, some clause in the cruel arithmetic of it that no one had noticed in 300 years. She read every book in the frozen library. She read about curses and their unmaking, about name magic and its limits, about the old witches of the north who had once held power to shape the world with a spoken word. And in the reading, a small suspicion began to grow in her, a suspicion about herself, about her mother, about the other thing Isolde had been too afraid to name. Because the book said something that did not match what she'd been told her whole life. The book said name speakers reveal. But they said there was another kind, rarer, older, feared not because they revealed the truth, but because they could change it. Reach into a name and rewrite what it meant. Unmake a binding, undo a curse. The books called them name weavers. And the books said the last of them had died out generations ago, hunted to nothing, because a person who can rewrite a true name can rewrite anything, including the version of the world that powerful men prefer to keep in place. Hunted, the oldest text said by an order that took no name of its own, an order that believed some truths were safer kept frozen. The margin beside those words had been scratched almost through, as if someone had tried and failed to erase them. Sabine read that passage 3 times. Then she closed the book, and she sat in the cold with her heart going hard, and she thought about her mother executed for a gift, and she thought about her father so desperate to bury something that he had bound his own daughter's tongue and sold her to a monster to die. And she thought about a man in gray who called his people the Silent Order, and who had watched her on the tribute ground the way a man checks that a lock has held. I didn't bind me because I was dangerous, she thought. He bound me because I was a cure, but a cure for what she did not yet know. But she was close. She could feel it the way she could feel a name gathering behind her teeth, the whole terrible shape of it, just beneath the surface, waiting. She almost didn't send the letter, but she had to know about her mother, about the other thing, and there was only one person left who might tell her the truth and not have a reason to lie. So she wrote to Isolde, careful words in case the letter was read, and she sent it south with a rider through the passes, and she waited. The answer came 9 days later. It was not from Isolde. It came sewn into the lining of a merchant's cloak, a scrap of paper folded small, and the hand that had written it was old and shaking and unfamiliar. It said only this: "Your mother is not dead, she is held. If you would save the man you love, come to the old shrine below the weeping pass before the moon is full. Come alone. Tell no one. A friend of Rowena's." Sabine read it standing at her window with the snow coming down outside, and the world tilted underneath her, because her mother was dead. She had always been dead. Her father had had her executed when Sabine was small. Everyone knew it. Everyone had always known it. It was the central wound around which her whole life had organized itself. Her mother was dead. That was the one fixed and certain star in the black sky of her childhood. Except she is held. Present tense. She is. Sabine's hands were shaking so hard the paper rattled. Because if her mother had been alive this whole time, all these years while Sabine grew up believing herself the last of her kind, the last carrier of a cursed gift alone, then everything she knew was a lie. Her whole life was a lie built on a grave with no body in it. And someone had wanted her to believe it. Someone had needed her to believe it. The same someone she understood with a cold certainty that had nothing to do with the North, who had built a trap around a man where love was the thing that killed him. A friend of Rowena's. Her mother's name. A name Sabine had not heard spoken aloud since she was a child. Come alone. Tell no one. She did not tell Droust. She told herself it was to protect him, that if he knew she was leaving, he'd forbid it, or worse, insist on coming, and the journey would kill him faster than the frost ever could. She told herself it was mercy. But underneath, in the honest place, she knew the real reason. Because if her mother was alive, and if the price of that truth was her mother's death, or her own, or something worse, she wanted to carry it alone. The way she had always carried everything alone. Because that was the only way she knew how to love. From behind a wall, from behind a muzzle, from a safe, cold distance where no one could be hurt by the wanting. Which was, she would realize far too late, the exact same prison Droust lived in. Two people who had learned to love only from far away, trying badly to love each other up close. She meant to leave the next morning. She did not leave the next morning. Because that night Droust came to her chambers. Not the library, not for questions. He came to her door late when the fortress was silent, and the only sound was the wind working at the eaves, and when she opened it, he was standing there with the frost climbing past his jaw, now into the hollows of his cheeks, and his eyes were the eyes of a man who has decided to stop pretending. I have been lying to you, he said, by omission, about why I keep leaving before dawn, about the dark, about all of it. Droust, Aldrich. He said his own true name, and she had never heard him do that, not once. Tonight I want you to call me Aldrich, because tonight I am going to tell you the truth, and the beast should not be the one to hear it. She stepped back, he came in, and he told her. He told her he had been a man once before the curse, a young lord of the North 300 years gone. He told her about the witch who had loved him, and whom he had not loved back, and how a spurned love in the hands of real power becomes something monstrous. He told her the exact words of the curse which he had carried alone for 3 centuries and never once spoken aloud. That he would live forever cold. That the frost would consume him by inches. That there was only one thing that could stop it: genuine love, freely given and freely returned. And that the moment he allowed himself to feel that love, the frost would race to his heart and kill him before the love could save him. Do you see, he said, and his voice was breaking, 300 years of ice breaking all at once. Do you see the shape of it? She did not curse me to be alone. She cursed me to be saved by the one thing I could never survive. Every day I do not love, I die slowly. The day I do, I die fast. He laughed, and it was a terrible sound. It is a beautiful piece of work. I have had 3 centuries to admire it. Then don't, Sabine whispered. Don't feel it. Push it away. If it kills you, it's too late for that. What? He crossed the room, and he took her face in his frozen hands, and the cold of them made her gasp. But she did not pull away. She never pulled away. It is already too late, he said. It has been too late for weeks. The frost is at my throat, Sabine. Do you understand what that means? A man does not die of a love he refused. He dies of a love he could not stop. His thumb moved across her cheek. I could not stop. And Sabine, who had spent her whole life behind walls, behind muzzles, loving only from a distance safe enough to hurt, no one did the most dangerous thing she had ever done. She stopped hiding. I love you, she said. I have loved you since you took the cloth from my mouth and told me no one would ever silence me again. I love you, Aldrich, and I am not going to apologize for it, and I am not going to take it back to save your life, because a life you'd have to live without letting anyone love you isn't a life, it's just a slower kind of dying. He stared at her, and for one moment, one single perfect, unbearable moment, the ice in his eyes cracked all the way through, and she saw the man beneath the young lord, the person he had been before, 300 years of frost. And he was looking at her like she was the first warm thing he had seen since the world was young. You love me, he said. Yes. Say it again. I love you. And that was when it happened. His hand flew to his chest. His whole body went rigid, and beneath his shirt, she saw the frost bloom a white starburst spreading across his heart, faster than anything she had ever seen, the rhyme move racing outward in every direction at once. No, he gasped. Not yet. I wasn't ready. I thought I had more. Aldrich. The trigger. His knees buckled. She caught him all his terrible weight and went down with him to the cold stone floor. That's the trigger. The frost knows. It always knows the moment. I let myself feel it, and now, tell me what to do. The frost was at his jaw. His hair. His pale eyes were filming over white ice crystallizing across the whites of them, and still he found her hand. Still he gripped it with the last of his strength. The name, he whispered. My true name. It is the key. It has always been the key. Speak it and weave it. She buried the answer in the curse itself. Speak my name, and his chest stopped moving. Aldrich. Aldrich. The cold poured off his body like something with a will. The rime climbed the last inch to his hairline and stopped, and he lay in her arms encased in a shell of frost, beautiful and terrible, and utterly perfectly still. And Sabine knelt on the freezing stone with the dead weight of the man she loved in her arms, and she understood at last with a clarity that split her open like the crack of breaking ice she had killed him. With love, exactly as the curse had promised. She screamed for help. She screamed until her voice tore. And somewhere far off in the fortress she heard doors slamming, feet running, but she knew deep down in the place where the names lived, that no ordinary healer could undo this. His last words turned over and over in her head. Speak my name and weave it. She buried the answer in the curse itself. Weave it. Not speak. Weave. And Sabine went very still there on the cold floor, with the answer rising in her like a name behind her teeth. The other thing. The thing her mother had died to hide. The thing her father had killed to bury, the thing Isolde had been too frightened to say aloud. She was not a name speaker. She had never been only a name speaker. And somewhere to the south, held in the dark, below the weeping pass, her mother was alive and waiting, the only person left in the world who could teach her what she truly was, before the man she loved was lost to the frost forever. The moon outside was 3 nights from full. Sabine laid Drous down as gently as if he might still feel it. She pressed her lips to his frozen forehead. And when she rose, her face was wet, and her hands were steady, and something in her eyes had changed, hardened, brightened, come awake. Hold on, she told the frozen shape of him. You held on for 300 years. Hold on 3 more days. And she went to find the truth that would either save him or finish them both. She did not reach the door, because an old woman was already standing in it. Sabine had not heard her come. No footsteps, no creak of the great hinges. Nothing, one moment. The doorway held only shadow, and the next it held a woman small and bent and wrapped in furs so old they had gone the gray of driftwood. Her face was weathered past any guessing of years, but her eyes were sharp, sharp as broken glass, sharp as the frost that had taken the man on the floor. You'll want to put down the notion of running, the old woman said. You won't get to your mother in time, not the way you are now. Sabine got to her feet, slow, careful, placing herself between the stranger and the frozen shape of Droust. Who are you? Hedda. The old woman's gaze moved past her to the man on the floor, and something crossed her ancient face that was almost tenderness. I was the witch who served this territory, before the curse fell, before all of it. She looked back at Sabine. I have been waiting 300 years for someone like you to walk into this hall. Someone like me. A name weaver. Hedda said it plainly the way you'd name the weather, though I'd wager no one ever taught you the word. And there it was, the other thing. The thing Isolde could not say. The thing her mother had not died to hide, had been buried alive in a lie to hide. I'm a name speaker, Sabine heard herself say. small, almost pleading. I reveal true names, that's all. That's all I've ever. That's what your father needed you to believe. Hedda crossed the room and knelt beside Droust with a grunt and laid one gnarled hand against the ice of his cheek. Speakers reveal child. Weavers transform. You don't only see the name beneath the name, you can reach into it, reshape it, unmake what's been bound and bind what's been broken. She looked up. You can undo a curse. It's the rarest gift the old world ever made, and the most hunted. Sabine's knees went soft. She sat hard on the edge of the low stone dais. My mother, she whispered. The letter said she's alive. Is that Rowena? Hedda's voice cracked on the name. The most powerful weaver born in 5 centuries. I taught her girl when she was younger than you are now. Taught her everything I knew and watched her outgrow all of it inside a year. Grief moved through the old face. Then she ran south. Thought she could hide among ordinary folk. Marry a lord, raise a family, be small. A dry, bitter sound. But power like Rowena's doesn't stay small. It never does. My father had her killed. Your father had her taken. Hedda's eyes hardened. There's a difference, and it's the whole of it. He told the world she was executed. He showed them a grave. But there's no body under that stone child. Never was, because the men who paid him wanted her alive. The room tilted. Paid him, Sabine breathed. You didn't think a man bound his own daughter's tongue out of simple cruelty, did you? Hedda's voice was gentle now, which was somehow worse. There is an order in this world, old and quiet and patient, that needs the curse on this house to hold. The silent order they call themselves when they call themselves anything. They've grown fat and comfortable on 3 centuries of a frozen north with a monster at its head. A weaver is the one thing that could end it. Your mother was a weaver. You are a weaver. She spread her hands. So they took the mother, and they bound the daughter, and they made very, very certain that no one who could undo their work would ever come north. And Sabine understood, all at once, the whole terrible architecture of her life. Her father had not hated her because she reminded him of her mother. Her father had feared her because she could do what her mother could do, because she was the cure they had all worked so hard to bury, because somewhere out there men she had never met had looked at a baby girl in Eldervale and decided she was too dangerous to be allowed a voice. They muzzled me, she thought, because they were afraid of what I might say, which was the truest thing anyone had ever taught her about power. That the ones who hold it fear nothing so much as a mouth they cannot control. How do I save him, she said. You already know. Hedda, how? The old woman rose, joints cracking, and looked down at the frozen lord. Speak his true name, she said. But this time weave it. Reach into the name and find the threads of the curse knotted through it and cut them. Reshape what his name means from a prison into a door. She met Sabine's eyes. But you can't. Not yet. Not as you are. Why not? Because your gift is sealed. Hedda said it flat. It was sealed when you were a child. Not the speaking they couldn't reach, the speaking it always leaked through, but the weaving, the real power, that they locked away, and they hid the key. The muzzle was never the seal. Hedda shook her head. The muzzle only punished the speaking. The seal on your weaving is older, deeper. It's an object, girl, a stone, carved with binding runes and kept close by the man who profited most from keeping you small. Her mouth twisted. Your father. Sabine was already on her feet. Then I'll take it from him. You'll have to. Hedda glanced at the window at the moon rising fat and pale over the frozen valley. And you'll have to be quick about it. Look at him, child. Look close. Sabine looked, and she saw. The frost was not still. Even now, even in this frozen death, the rime was creeping a hair's breadth at a time, so slow you'd miss it if you weren't watching, closing the last small distance toward the center of his chest. He's not dead, she said. Her voice came out strange, hopeful and terrified in equal measure. Not yet. Hedda's face was grave. The curse feeds on his love, and his love hasn't stopped just because his heart has. It's the cruelest part of the whole cruel thing. The stronger he feels, the faster it takes him. And that man loves you, girl, with 300 years of everything he was never allowed to feel. She laid a hand on Sabine's arm. Days, maybe less. Then the frost reaches his heart, and no weaver born will call him back. Sabine looked at the frozen man on the floor, at the ice on his lashes, at the last faint thread of warmth she could still feel if she reached for it, buried deeper now than it had ever been, but there, still refusing to go out. Keep him, she told Hedda. Whatever it takes, keep him breathing until I come back. And where are you going exactly? Sabine was already reaching for her cloak. South, she said, for the seal, and for my mother. Her hand closed on the door. And to look my father in the eye and make him understand for the first time in his life exactly what he spent everything to keep quiet. The road south took 2 days she did not have, because the passes were choked with snow and her horse could not run through drifts to its chest, and every hour that fell behind her, she felt the thread stretch thinner, that strange, impossible thread that had strung itself between her and the frozen man the night she'd told him she loved him. She could feel him at the far end of it. Barely. A pulse so faint it was almost the memory of a pulse. But it was there, which meant he was there, which meant she still had time. Barely. Barely. She rode through the first night and did not stop. She rode through the gray morning with ice in her hair and her hands frozen to the reins. And on the second evening, as the sun bled out behind the western peaks, the Roderick estate rose up before her, out of the blue dusk, the house she had grown up in, the house she had been muzzled in, the house she had sworn on the tribute ground she would never see again. She swore a different oath now. She rode straight through the gates. Two of Droust's guards flanked her, the only souls in that fortress who had volunteered to follow her south, and the household men took one look at the fury in her face and did not raise a hand. She found her father in his study, wine in his hand, fire in the grate, as though it were any ordinary evening, as though he had not sold his daughter to a monster and buried his wife in a lie. He looked up, and to his credit or his damnation, he did not look afraid. "Daughter," Roderick said, "I confess I did not expect you to survive this long. Where is the seal?" "What seal?" "Don't." Her voice did not shake. She noted that distantly with something like wonder that after a lifetime of silence her voice did not shake. "The stone. The one that locks the weaving. I know what I am now, Father. I know what you buried. I want it." Something flickered behind his eyes. Not fear. Calculation. Always calculation. "So," he said and set down his wine. "You finally learned the word for yourself. A weaver." He shook his head slowly. "She said you'd be strong. Your mother. Right before the end, she told me you have no idea what you've made, Roderick. She told me you'd come for me one day." A thin smile. "I confess I hoped she was wrong. You killed her. I had her taken." The correction came smooth practiced, and Sabine felt her stomach turn at how many times he must have said it to himself to make it sit so easy. There's a difference. There is no difference. She was becoming difficult. He rose from his chair, and for the first time she saw that he had aged, that the years since had not been kind to him, that guilt or fear or simple time had carved him hollow. She wanted to take you, train you, make you into what she was, and I could not permit that. His jaw tightened. I had responsibilities, arrangements. There were men to whom I had made promises. The silent order. Sabine took a step closer. Corvain, the men who pay you, the ones who need the curse to hold. Fear flickered finally in his eyes. How do you know that name? It doesn't matter how. And it didn't, because a new voice had spoken from the doorway. He won't tell you anything useful, sister. Sabine turned. Isolde stood in the doorway, pale, trembling, but standing. Isolde, their father said low. A warning. Go back to your rooms. No. Her sister's voice broke on the word and held anyway. I've been going back to my rooms my whole life, Father. Every time. Every single time you did something monstrous. I went back to my rooms and I was quiet, and I told myself it wasn't my place. Tears stood in her eyes. I was in the house the night they took Mother. Did you know that, Sabine? I was 6 years old. I saw the men in gray come. I saw her fight, and I hid. I hid, and I was quiet, and I let them take her, and I have been quiet for 12 years. Isolde, Sabine started. I know where the seal is. Isolde said it fast before her courage could fail, before the fear could pull her back into silence one more time. I've watched him. The letters he sends, the men in gray who come after dark. I know what he is, and I know where he keeps it. She lifted a shaking hand and pointed to the wall, to the portrait of their grandfather that had hung there Sabine's whole life. Behind that, there's a vault. You ungrateful! Roderick lunged. Droust's guards had him before he crossed the floor. Sabine crossed to the portrait, pulled it aside on its hidden hinge, and there set into the stone was a small iron safe with a keyhole black as a missing tooth. The key, she said. Roderick laughed bitter, struggling against the guards. You think this ends it? You think you take your little stone and ride north and it's done. The Order doesn't forgive, girl. They don't forget. You free that monster, and you make an enemy of the most patient power this world has ever. The key, father. He threw it at her feet, hatred in his eyes hot and helpless. Sabine picked it up, turned it in the lock, and the safe swung open to reveal a small carved box, and when she lifted the lid, she felt it a pull, a tug, a click somewhere deep in her chest, like a bone sliding back into a socket she hadn't known was empty, the seal. A disc of pale stone no larger than her palm, its face carved over with runes that seemed to writhe when she did not look at them straight. She could feel it, the part of herself it held. The part they'd locked away when she was too small to fight, too small to even remember, so that she'd grown up believing the smallness was simply who she was. She closed her hand around it. Send for the constable, she told the guards. Lord Roderick will answer for conspiracy, for murder, for treason against the crown of Northreach. Treason, her father spat the word. I am no subject of that frozen beast. You made yourself one. Sabine looked at him, and felt to her own surprise no hatred at all, only a vast and terrible pity. The moment you sold your daughter across his border, father, you became a man of the North. You just never bothered to read what you'd signed. She turned to her sister. Isolde was weeping now openly, the 12 years of it all coming loose at once. Thank you, Sabine said. I'm sorry. Isolde could barely get it out. For all of it, for the silence, for every time I know. And Sabine crossed to her and did the thing she had wanted to do since she was a child, and never once been allowed. She put her arms around her sister. I know. It's done. You spoke, Isolde. When it mattered most, you spoke. That's the only thing that was ever going to matter. And her sister held on to her like a woman who had been drowning in her own silence for 12 years and had at last come up for air. Go, Isolde whispered against her shoulder. Go save him. Go do the thing none of us were brave enough to do. Sabine went. She rode north faster than she'd come south, because the thread was thinning. She could feel it, that terrible fineness, the pulse at the far end gone so faint, she had to stop twice in the dark and simply close her eyes and reach for it and pray she still felt something. And each time, just as her heart began to break there, a flutter, a whisper of him still holding, still refusing. Hold on, she thought, driving the horse through the drifts. You held on 300 years. Hold on for me. When the fortress rose out of the blizzard on the third night, she did not wait for her horse to stop. She threw herself from the saddle and ran, the seal burning against her palm like a coal, up the frozen steps through the great dark hall. Hedda met her outside the chamber door. You're almost too late, the old woman said. His heart's barely a whisper. Another night and there'd be nothing to call back. Sabine pushed past her and stopped, because Drost lay where she'd left him, but he was no longer a man. He was a sculpture of winter. The frost had claimed all of him, face, hands, the loose spill of his frost-white hair, and he lay encased in a shell of ice so clear she could see straight through to the terrible stillness of the man inside. Beautiful. Perfect. Gone, or as near to gone as made no difference. Except the thread. Except that one thin thread she still felt running from her chest to his. Tell me what to do, she said. Break the seal first. Hedda's voice was low, urgent. You can't weave with your gift still locked. Break it, and you'll have everything they stole from you. But I won't lie to you, child. The old woman's eyes were grave. It will hurt. It's a part of yourself that was cut off and buried when you were small. Taking it back is going to feel like tearing. Sabine looked at the disk of pale stone in her hand, at the runes that writhed when she didn't look straight. And she thought of her mother taken in the night while a 6-year-old hid and stayed quiet. She thought of the years she'd spent muzzled, believing herself dangerous, believing herself cursed, believing the smallness was simply the shape of her soul. She thought of every quiet, careful, frightened woman who had ever been told that her voice was too dangerous to be let out of its cage. And she thought of the man in the ice, who had taken the cloth from her mouth, who had told her no one would ever silence her again. "It's already hurt," she said. "My whole life it's hurt. This is just the last of it." And she closed her fist, and she pulled. The pain was beyond anything the muzzle had ever done to her. It was not a burning, it was a tearing, the sensation of a limb she'd forgotten she had, being wrenched back into a body that had learned to live without it. She screamed. She heard the stone crack. She pulled harder and the runes flared white-hot against her palm, fighting, resisting 300 years of careful binding, refusing to let go. And with a sound like a frozen lake breaking in the spring thaw, the seal shattered. Power flooded into her. And oh, she had not known. She had lived her whole life half-blind and never guessed at it. Because now she could feel them, the names, all of them, everywhere. Not just see them, sense them, their shapes, their weights, their colors, singing in the dark. The fire in the grate had a name. The stone of the walls had a name. The wind at the eaves, the snow on the sill, the very cold itself, all of it named, all of it singing, the whole world revealed as a vast and intricate song made entirely of true names. And in the center of it, cold and blue and silent, his. "Now," Hedda breathed, "speak his name, and weave it, child. Find the threads of the curse and cut them free." Sabine climbed onto the frozen bier where he lay. She laid both hands flat against the shell of ice above his heart, and she closed her eyes. And in the dark, behind her eyes, she saw his name, saw it, the way a weaver sees not a word, but a living thing, a shape of cold blue light, and wrapped around it, strangling it, chains. Ancient chains of the witch's making, knotted and cruel, cinched so tight around the true name of the man that they had nearly crushed the light out of it entirely. She reached for the chains. They fought her. Of course they fought her. 300 years of malice does not surrender to a single touch. The cold surged up her arms, trying to freeze her out, trying to claim her the way it had claimed him. Her fingers went numb. Her breath crystallized. The frost began to climb her own wrists, hungry, reaching. But Sabine was not cold. Sabine had never been cold. She was the warmth beneath the ice. She was the ember that would not go out. She was every quiet woman's voice finally let out of its cage, and she was fire, and the chains could not hold fire. "Aldrich," she said, and her voice rang through the frozen chamber with a power that shook the frost from the walls. "I see you, not the beast they made you, not the monster in the stories, not the horror they carved on their warnings to frighten children. I see the man beneath, the warmth they buried under 300 years of ice. I see you, and I know your name, and here is what I do with it." The chains shuddered. "I weave you free. I unbind you from this curse. I take your name, the one they turned into a prison, and I reshape it into a door." She bore down all of it, everything she was, everything they'd tried to lock away. Not Drouse the beast, not Aldrich the frozen lord, who was cursed to die of the only thing that could save him. Just you, the man I love, freely, without a price, without a trap, mine and no one's cage. The chains screamed and broke. Light exploded from the ice, warm, golden, impossibly bright, the color of a summer no one in the north had seen for 300 years. It poured out of him, out of his name, out of the shattered chains, and the shell of frost cracked from crown to foot with a sound like the whole world exhaling. The ice melted. It did not drip. It rose into light, into warmth, into nothing. And beneath it he gasped. His eyes flew open. And they were not white. Not the pale near white of the beast. They were gray, clear storm cloud, gray, the gray of a sky the moment the clouds break and let the sun come pouring through, and they found her face, and they filled with tears. "Sabine," he breathed. She collapsed against his chest, sobbing, and his arms came around her, and they were warm. They were warm. You did it. Hedda's cracked old voice thick with tears of her own. You did it, girl. The curse is broken, not just from him, from his whole line, from the very stone of this place. Do you feel it? The north is warm again. For the first time in 300 years, the north is warm. Aldrich's hand found Sabine's face, his warm, warm hand. You should be gone, he whispered. The weaving. The stories all say a weaver who breaks a curse this old gives up her power to do it. You should have lost everything. I know. Sabine laughed, wet and disbelieving, because she could feel it still, the names, all of them singing undimmed. I should have. Then why? Because I didn't spend it destroying, she said. And she understood it even as she said it, the last piece of the whole long puzzle sliding into place. The power only breaks the wielder when it's spent to break something. I didn't break you, Aldrich. I didn't unmake you. I set you free. I used it to reveal what was true and let it loose. She pressed her forehead to his. Weavers were never meant to be weapons. That's the lie the Order built the whole hunt on. We were never meant to destroy. We were meant to unbury. And you can't lose yourself doing the thing you were made for. And there in the melting dark, with 300 years of frost turning to warm water around them, the beast of the north, who was not a beast at all, who had never been a beast, only a man buried alive in someone else's cruelty, kissed her. Deep, desperate, full of every warm thing he had spent 3 centuries forbidden to feel. The men in gray came, of course. They always come, the ones who profit from a silence the moment that silence breaks. They come to see it mended. Their leader was the tall man from the tribute ground from the back of the wedding hall, the one Isolde had named, Corvain. He came to the fortress a fortnight later, at the head of a delegation, all courtesy and quiet threat, in a magister's robes, and a voice like a lock turning to remind the newly freed lord of the north of the way things were done. He had not counted on the weaver. Because Sabine stood at Aldrich's side in the great warm hall, and when Corvain began his smooth speech about arrangements and understandings, and the great cost of disrupting a peace, 3 centuries in the making, she simply looked at him, and found his name. And it was an ugly thing. She saw it the moment she reached for it, a name knotted through with rot, with the true names of every soul his order had bound and buried and silenced across 300 years. Her mother's among them, threaded through him like veins of black through marble. I know what you are, Sabine said. Corvain's smooth speech faltered. I know your name, she said, rising. Your true one. The one beneath the title, beneath the robes, beneath the courtesy. And here's the thing your whole order forgot, Magister, when it spent 3 centuries hunting my kind to silence. She stepped toward him, and the names of the North sang at her back, and she had never in her life felt less afraid. You built your power on the belief that a weaver's gift is for destroying, that we're weapons, that the only thing a mouth like mine can do is kill. A cold smile. But I'm not going to unmake you, Corvain. I wouldn't waste it. And she spoke his true name aloud, not to kill him, to reveal him. She wove it open like a locked door thrown wide so that every soul in that hall, every envoy, every witness, every quiet, frightened person who had ever been told to look the other way saw exactly what he was, saw the buried names, saw the silenced dead, saw 300 years of cruelty dressed up in a pretty word's clothing, laid bare at last in the warm light of a hall that had finally thawed. Corvain's power was silence, and Sabine had just made him the loudest thing in the room. His order did not survive the telling. You cannot hunt in the daylight. And when a whole hall of witnesses rides home carrying the truth in their mouths, the truth does not go back in its cage. They found her mother 3 days later in the dark below the Weeping Pass, held exactly where the letter had promised, thin and gray, and 12 years older, but alive. Alive. And when Rowena opened her eyes and saw her daughter standing over her, grown and free and unmuzzled, she wept the way only a woman weeps, who had made peace with never seeing her child again and was proven mercifully wrong. You found your voice, Rowena whispered, touching her daughter's unbound face. You gave it to me, Sabine said. I just had to go get it back. Spring came to the north that year, for the first time in 300 years. Real spring. The kind with meltwater, running in the eaves and green pushing up through the softening ground and birds. Actual birds returning to a country that had forgotten the sound of them. Sabine stood at the window of the great hall and watched it come. Aldrich crossed the room to stand beside her, and where he walked the floor stayed dry. No frost, no rime, just a man warm-blooded and gray-eyed whose footsteps left nothing behind them but the ordinary print of an ordinary life. Her mother sat by the fire teaching Isolde the old songs. Because Isolde had come north to stay, had left the cold house of their father behind for good, and was learning slowly that a woman who finally speaks does not have to stop. And Hedda dozed in her chair, 300 years of waiting finally blessedly done. I keep thinking, Aldrich said quietly, of the girl on the tribute ground, bound and silent at the end of the line, certain she'd been sent north to die. He took Sabine's warm hand in his warm hand. Everyone in that place looked at you and saw a thing to be gotten rid of. Dangerous. Cursed. A mouth to be muzzled. His thumb moved over her knuckles. And you were the only one in 300 years who could set us all free. They were afraid of the wrong thing, Sabine said softly, watching the spring come. They thought my voice was dangerous because it could destroy, but that was never what frightened them, not really. She leaned her head against his shoulder. What frightened them was that it could tell the truth. That's the only thing power like theirs has ever been afraid of. A voice it couldn't own. Aldrich was quiet a moment. The beast of the north, he murmured, bowed to no alpha, bent to no king. 300 years and no army, no crown, no power on this earth could touch him. He pressed a kiss to her hair. Until a girl they'd muzzled looked at him across the snow, he said, and spoke his true name, and gave him back his voice, and in the giving found her own. Outside the last of the frost gave way to green, and the north warm at last was quiet. Not the old quiet, the frozen quiet, the quiet of a mouth held shut by someone else's hand. But the good quiet, the quiet of a thing at peace, the quiet of a house where everyone at long last was free to speak.